We're here in a beautiful setting to discuss a very miserable subject, the global financial turmoil. And I'm joined by two very distinguished economists, Professor Nouriel Roubini at New York University Stern School of Business, and Jim O'Neill, the head of global economic research at Goldman Sachs. If I could start with you, Professor Roubini. You've argued that the housing collapse in America is the worst since the Great Depression and that the recessionary train has left the station. How many stops do you think we've got to go, and where is this train going to end?
Yes, at this point it's clear that the U.S. is in a recession. The latest figures today on employment confirm that employment has fallen now for 3 months in a row. So the debate is not anymore on soft landing versus hard landing, but rather whether this is going to be a shallow recession lasting only 6 months, like the consensus today on Wall Street, or rather, as I believe, it's going to be more severe and protracted, at least 12 months and possibly 18 months. I'm more pessimistic about the consensus for 3 reasons. One, this housing recession is getting worse, is not bottoming out. 2, this time around is the U.S. consumer that is shopped out, saving less, debt burden and buffeted by falling employment, high oil prices. And 3rd, we have a problem not just in subprime, but across the financial system. There has been a major seizure of credit across the financial system. This credit crunch is going to lead to a more severe recession.
Is there anything that the Fed has already done or can do that will help soften the impact of this?
Yes, the Fed has aggressively cut rates and also has used unorthodox policies like providing support to the non-bank financial system. At the margin, it's going to help. It's not going to prevent the recession. It's going to make it slightly more shallow. But monetary policy is going to be less effective for 2 reasons. We have a glut of housing, a lot of automobiles, a lot of consumer durables, so the demand for these things is less as interest sensitive. It's like pushing on a string. And 2, the problems of the economy are not just problems of illiquidity, but also problems of credit, of solvency, bankrupt households, bankrupt mortgage lenders, bankrupt corporations, some bankrupt financial institutions, bankrupt home builders. So credit problems take time to be resolved, and monetary policy cannot fully resolve them.
Right. Jim O'Neill, what do you make of that argument? You believe that there are more positive things going on in the global economy that could help soften the blow of this housing crisis. Could you explain what they are?
I think where I'd probably differ slightly with Nouriel is that I think there's a recession in US domestic demand. I'd agree that today's numbers confirm, which I thought anyhow, that the US is in a full-blown recession. But where the extended weakness is going to be is in domestic demand. In terms of overall GDP, the US is, for the first time in many, many years, getting enormous help from the rest of the world in terms of exports. And just like many other economies, even amazingly in some ways at this level of the euro, Italy, a lot of countries are exporting a lot to the developing world, including the US, in many different sectors. And I think that's softening the blow. So I'm in the sort of shallow camp in terms of the US recession.
And Nouriel, to what extent do you think this is going to affect the rest of the world, and in particular Europe? You've already seen some beginning of an effect in Europe, but do you think this is going to get a lot worse?
Yeah, in my view, the debate on whether the rest of the world is going to recouple rather than decouple from the US depends on how shallow the US recession is. If it's mild and the consensus is correct, then yes, there is enough demand in the rest of the world. If the U.S. shocks, financial and others, are such that there's going to be a severe U.S. recession, I acknowledge the increase in net exports, then I think the transmission through the trade channels, through the weakening dollar, through financial contagion, through credit crunch is going to imply a more severe slowdown of global economic growth. In the case of Europe, I think there are several forces that imply significant slowdown. The deflation of some of the housing bubbles, the fact that oil prices 100, even converted in Europe, are high in Europe, the fact that at least the Fed is cutting rates while the ECB is on hold, and the fact that a lot of the growth of Europe was also based on export demand, like in Germany, rather than real income growth that has been shallow. And we've had also the credit crunch and the financial contagion having effects also on the ability of European firms to borrow. So these are the channels of transmission that imply, in my view, a slowdown of economic growth in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Jim, there seems to be a difference in view between central banks in the world, between the Fed and the ECB in particular, with the Fed more concerned about economic contraction and the ECB more concerned about inflation. How are those two views of the world consistent?
Well, they're both, people have to remember they both got different mandates and they're both following the mandates. The Fed's Fed's mandate is to keep inflation under control, but also to try and keep employment as close to full as possible. And that's what they're trying to do. The ECB's got a very specific mandate to keep inflation just below 2%, which is exactly what they're trying to do. So when people try and make comments about how well they're both doing, they always should start from the basis of what their mandate is, and they're both following their own mandate. My own guess of where the things start to get closer is that I personally suspect eventually the next move of the ECB is going to be to cut. At the margin, in the past few weeks, you are seeing evidence of I don't know whether you call it recoupling or contagion. It's spreading very slowly in a number of European economies. Spain is very weak. Ireland is exceptionally weak. Italy is showing more and more signs of weakness. And so it's sort of like Germany, for the first time in years, is the thing that's keeping everything supported. But if we saw any slowing of note in German exports, then the new forecast of the IMF, which is importantly significantly below that of the EU, would look more like the new forecast of the EU and ECB going forward, which would be enough for them to consider cutting. So, but I don't think people should be excessively focused on them following a different view of the world. It's because the mandates are different.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I think the overall view at this forum is that the Fed's decisive action to intervene in the markets and to support Bear Stearns indirectly has turned the mood in the financial markets. But as Professor Roubini has said, it now depends on what happens on the snowball effect in the real economy to see what the lasting damage from this crisis is. Goodbye from Lake Como.